Just like a classroom, the silence of the room is signified we're ready to start. So today we have our work session featuring our colleagues from Arlington Public Schools where they'll present their proposed budget. Before we begin with that, we were going to have some presentations and discussion with the Teen Network Board as well as the Partnership for Children, Youth, and Families. So, as most people know, spring break has officially started at the conclusion of the school day, so in an effort to make sure our students get a chance to maximize their spring break, we're going to have them go first. So I invite the Teen Network Board to come up first.
Is Katie on the phone?
Great, thanks.
Do we need to call her? I think
We'll get to it. That's perfect. So welcome. Please introduce yourself, and we're looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Good afternoon, County and School Board. It's our privilege to stand before you to share with the work that we've done in the community as Arlington Teen Network Board. We are Arlington Teen Network representatives. I'm Gracia Melendez, the co-chair currently for the year 2018-2019. I've been on the Teen Network Board for 2 years. But I've had older siblings to be on the board, so I've known the board for many years now.
My name is Marshall McGuire. I'm a freshman at Wakefield High School, and I've only been on it for a year, but so far it's a great experience, and I like all the friends I've met and the changes we've made. So since the last time we went before either board, we have noticed that there are newly elected members of each, so we will just share a little bit about who TNB is. The Teen Network Board is a fully functioning commission in the county's commission structure. The Arlington Partnership for Children, Youth, and Families is our companion organization from which we draw our information and data sources. We work closely with the partnership and many county and community adult-led organizations by providing youth liaisons for their work. We also have many partnerships with other youth-serving organizations locally, including those made through our national affiliations. The TNB has the honor of developing and promoting the community youth engagement model in our efforts to be the voice for youth and teens in our community. We strive to support other youth-serving programs and agencies by working together as partners to join all those voices for the overall common good of our community and to promote the skills of future leaders and for the county.
The Arlington Teen Network Board has 4 subcommittees that are derived from the school report cards published by the Arlington Partnership for Children and Youth and Families, other known as APCYF. Based on the results of the surveys we used to put together the 2019 Community Report Card and the new Your Voice Matters data. The Teen Network Board chooses which issues to recommend our subcommittees will focus on. The 4 committees of 2018-2019 are communications, drug and alcohol prevention, volunteer internships, community service and employment, other known as VICE, and peer-to-peer relationships.
The peer-to-peer relationship subcommittee, which I'm actually a part of, centers around creating healthy relationships between youth and educating them about the mental health and the impacts that they can have on the healthy growth and development through prevention campaigns. This committee plays an active role in the annual Out of School Time Conference and have prepared several presentations for the conference starting in 2015 and continuing to do so. They are also heavily involved in the conference planning. This year we have asked to incorporate the work of HRT, Healthy Relationship Task Force of Project Peace, This new focus will be a new opportunity to focus on educating youth about healthy dating and sexual violence and to support survivors.
The next committee that we have is the Volunteer Internships, Community Service, and Employment. The subcommittee serves to research and propose and implement opportunities in those 4 areas in particular. We are responsible for the annual teen volunteer fair, where different organizations come out and have a chance to speak out with fellow teens in the community and give them an opportunity to volunteer. Another project we have is identifying opportunity employments. We have a project that is known as BEAT, which is businesses that employ Arlington teens. That currently it's on the 2nd year in happening.
So have we gone over communications? Oh, okay. So the communications subcommittee has extended the Teen Network Board's amount of community outreach. So they're kind of our social media, and they log all of our hours. Our statistics this year has shown that we have hit a new high of 142,290 visits to the arlingtonteens.com website. Our website is a comprehensive view of information and resources for our peers. We also are active on Facebook, Snapchat, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube.
The Drug and Alcohol Prevention Subcommittee has increased its presence in the middle schools in Arlington with the Mythbusters event, a program that debunks myths about high school to middle schoolers during their transition into high school. We also had a record amount of students participate in an annual event that's that's a national campaign called Sticker Shock, where we go into stores and we place stickers telling stores that they don't participate in the illegal selling legal purchases of alcohol for minors. The members of these committees attend 2 national substance prevention conferences in 2018 and 2019 seasons. Please note, several of these committees are standing committees, and some are flexible based on what our peers have interest in.
So it has been apparent that substance abuse has been an increasing issue in youth. We have found that 13% of APS students have used e-vapor devices within the past 30 days. The new questions added to the YRBS in 2017 provides data about sexual harassment on school property at the astonishing rate of 46% for female students in grades 8, 10, and 12th grades. It is imperative that any and all best practice services and programs available to substance abuse counselors collaborating with psychologists to fully assist with substance abuse and other co-occurring diagnoses with their impact and well-being. In reviewing our current budget, it is important to once again strongly suggest the increase of psychologists and social workers not to be postponed and to be fully funded. Given the current unrestrained, detached, emotionally charged climate of our nation, our peers need all the emotional and social support available. Psychologists have become an important outlet that others cannot fill. Counselors are often busy with schedules and other meetings, and the need for other options available for help is crucial for the well-being of youth. We are excited about the pilot in Fairfax of the Youth Mental Health First Aid Training for Teens will become available for youth to receive training to be of support to their peers in more confirming ways.
With the county's new focus on equity and community conditions, it's important to remain the work that is contributed by the equity and excellence counselors in each of the high schools, because they're very important in our lives. To recognize the work of the Destination 2027 Committee and anticipate incorporating the data to guide the work of Teen Network Board in the future. Our new data has provided us with information about our LGBTQ peers, and we'll be addressing those issues as we look into continue our inclusive work in our community. We would like to request that both the county and the school board ensure that they will recognize the seriousness of the physical and mental well-being of the vulnerable demographic in our county.
It is clear that many programs and their funding have decreased over the last 2 years. or will be in the future, and will affect the ability to provide services at the federal level that impacts us on the local level. However, given what has been presented by the partnership and the Teen Network Board, we ask that you find a way to preserve and increase our local funding to avoid negative impacts to our youth.
We'd also like to acknowledge our appreciation to Chair Christian Dorsey, Vice Chair Libby Gravy, and Member Katie Crystal for their continued support and interest in the work of the Teen Network Board. With their support, we have thrived in promoting our mission of youth leadership, advocacy, and community service. We look forward to working with the entire county board in the future. We anticipate a more impactful relationship with the school board in the future and look forward to working with them as well. Again, on behalf of the entire Teen Network Board and our Youth Outreach Coordinator, Siobhan Grayson, we'll thank you for your invitation to this meeting and look forward to continuing working with you in the future.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Melendez and Mr. McGuire. Very effective presentation, and we very much appreciate the comments that you made about the budget items that are a part of the APS budget, which will be a part of our discussion a little bit later. So while we have you, and we do want to make sure we get you out as quickly as possible, but we do have some time for conversation from members of the respective boards. We have from the school board, Member Van Doren, Member Cannonen, and Member O'Grady attending, along with Vice Chair Talento and Chair Goldstein. And for the county board, we have Members DeFerranti and Gutschall attending in person. We have Member Katie Crystal on the phone, and Vice Chair Garvey and Chair Dorsey in person. So, discussion is with us. Any questions for our Teen Network Board? Ms. Garvey.
So I had one, because I'm realizing in listening to you all years ago, one of the big issues was that there wasn't a place for kids to just hang. Teenagers, they could be at school or at home, but there wasn't a place to just kind of hang. And we kind of talked about that and worked about it. We didn't get very far. I'm not sure there is that still a need that you all feel? Is it maybe with these devices it's different? The needs are different? I don't know.
I feel like there's different factors that come into the play with technology being such a big factor in our lives. But personally, I feel like there's new career centers like the Arlington Mill. I know a bunch of middle schoolers or kids who live on Columbia Pike go there and hang out, or Walter Reed Community Center, they go and play pool there. But I feel like there should be updates in playgrounds. Sometimes they're not always up to date, sometimes they're dirty or need new equipment, especially for the safety of the young elementary schoolers.
Okay, great. We have a skateboard park coming online pretty soon, too. Yeah.
It'll be really cool.
There is already
yes,
one at the
Boston.
Punch Bowl Social, and there's another one coming soon as well.
Yeah, so that might resolve that.
So I have a question about the vaping and the e-devices that deliver nicotine. And people my age remember a very focused effort that was on the federal level that permeated down to the state and local level about the hazards of smoking. And I'm wondering if you see, from your perspective, that there's enough public information out there about the hazards of vaping, since you cited that as a concern.
Well, there's definitely a lot of information, especially throughout schools when you walk through on the walls or poster boards, but I think there could be a little bit more of a variety of it, because a lot of the information's a lot of the same stuff just over and over again. So and of course it all got to do with, long-term effects or short-term effects, but not a lot of it has to do with how it could affect a relationship or how it could affect friendships. So I think there is a lot of information out there, but the variety could maybe be improved.
Thank you. Mr. Gutschall.
And Mr. Chair, I think Ms. Talento has also been seeking recognition. The lights don't work the same over there.
Yeah, for my school board colleagues, if you want, you can just press your button and I'll look for the little green light, or otherwise you can just raise your hand.
So to our young members here, thank you so much for the very nice presentation. If kids want to get involved with the TNB, how can they do that?
We have, obviously, our website is very popular at the moment. We do a lot of in-school tabling.
Do websites anymore. You still have a popular
We
website?
do Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter. You can find us at, you can ask us what our handles are. But since we do a lot of in-school tabling events, they usually come and pull us aside or ask us. Usually our members bring their own friends, so it grows itself. But Arlington Teen Network Board does allow freshmen to senior year. But it doesn't, if a middle schooler wants to help us out, that is totally welcome. We invite them to help participate in speaking out about drug and alcohol prevention or healthy relationships. As long as they contact us personally through social media, they're welcome to do so.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Talento, Vice Chair Talento.
Thank you for the excellent report, and I appreciated hearing about all the work that you're doing. And I'm grateful that you are addressing some of the issues that may come up in our conversation later this afternoon in our budget discussions. I wanted to ask you about your focus on mental health. I really appreciate that work. I know that that is something our youth really need support with. And I was curious if you had been discussing in your meetings or if eating disorders had come about. They're a silent killer, they're a lifelong disease, and it is a mental health illness, and a lot of people do not recognize that it's mental health and food is a tool versus it being something that is just food-based, and it's hard to talk about. So I was curious if you had any work on that. Is it something that you're looking in the work that you're doing? I noticed a focus on the LGBTQ peers, which is excellent because I know they are a vulnerable demographic group, and we're working hard to make sure they're welcome in our community, but I was curious about the other mental health efforts that you had.
So not from what I know of, we haven't spoke of it exclusively, but we do, especially with peer-to-peer, have we do have a few events coming up where it helps kids be able to not be so afraid to talk about their mental health issues and to not be afraid to just ask for help. Like seize the awkward, that's another thing we do to just kind of help calm nerves, ease them a little bit. So not exclusively, I haven't talked about it, that from what I know of, but we are making strides.
That's great, and your organization has input on the Your Voice Matters survey, is that correct?
Right, I feel like as we get more involved in the community, we'll deal with more specific issues. Obviously, our big one is overall mental health, because umbrellaing that, you're kind of umbrellaing everything under that.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to ask questions.
If you don't mind, I want to add on to my response to you. Our applications open on May 1st. So if you guys have any upcoming freshmen or sophomores or juniors, they're welcome to apply, and we'll hopefully see them in the fall.
Excellent. Dr. Cannon.
I just want to tag on real quickly to Ms. Talento's point, and I'm going to ask you guys, but I think the partnership chair is coming up to present next. Is that correct? They may have the answer, but I want to ask it now, which is to confirm, I believe it's the case that in the Youth Risk Behavior Survey or some of our newer surveys, we've added questions about LGBTQ that maybe weren't on the surveys before, and that we're now able to notice some things or say some things about that group that we weren't before. Do you know anything about that? It might be something that we have the next group coming up, right? It might be something that we can follow up on.
Yeah, I think that's a question for the partnership. Sorry.
All right, beautiful. We'll get that one next. Okay, Mr. DeFerranti, Ms. O'Grady, and then we'll go to Ms. Crystal on the phone.
I'm glad the statistic about 8th, 10th, and 12th graders and 46% of female students being harassed. That's very concerning. There was, of course, an event this week that Washington and Lee's students spoke at. I'm just wondering, at each of your schools and with what you're working on, have you thought at all about how, in light of these statistics, there might be ways to move healthy relationships and this concern up in your priorities? Because this is just such a critical issue, I think.
Actually, next year we are going to incorporate Healthy Relationship Task Force, which was its own commission in Arlington, and now it's going to be a big factor in the next 2019-2020 year. So hopefully we'll be doing a lot of more strides in that field.
Great, thank you.
Ms. O'Grady.
Thank you. Thank you for your wonderful presentation and for concentrating on so many things that our students are dealing with and being their voice here today. One of the things that we're talking about doing in the future is potentially a pilot for our students to, instead of riding school buses to school, some of them, potentially being able to catch the art bus to school. And I didn't know whether or not you feel as though, or maybe even speak about with your students, whether or not that is something that would be of interest for students.
Are we talking about incorporating, like, students have to pay for the art bus to go to school, or is it a partnership between the county and the school? Because I think that could be a definite, like, layer of whether or not some students can't afford the bus every day. I know I went to Kenmore, and I know there wasn't a school bus along Columbia Pike or Yellow Park or Tyrrell Hill, and students would take the art bus, and I feel like there is a community of students that are interested in that, but it comes along whether or not students can use that or cannot, because I know we have transfer students who may have moved and the art bus doesn't go to their high school. They live all the way in Yorktown and they're going to Wakefield, or they live in vice versa, and I think it just very depends, and you have to look at the demographics of where the students are going and whether or not the art bus has enough buses, and if that's going to have an effect with the community and having 200 kids going on bus 414 and not letting a person who needs to get their job at 8:15. So there's a lot of factors, and that's my opinion on that.
Yeah, you know, Ms. Van Doren, Mr. Gutschall, do you have an opening on the Joint Committee for Transportation Choices?
Yes.
I think Ms. Melendez might be, all right. All right.
I have to pick my jaw up first because that was such an insightful response. You have no idea. You do have idea. I don't have to tell you, you have no idea. That really was a fantastic response, and it gets to the heart of all the issues that we're grappling with. And yes, if you're interested in further committing yourself to service to the community, we will certainly find a role for you or a designee.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I think a student would be a great idea on that committee.
All right, Ms. Crystal, looking to hear your voice.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
We can.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to our Teen Network Board leaders for really a thoughtful presentation, as well as for submitting your comments in writing so that we could follow up on them. Really delighted to see the good work of the TNB this year and appreciate your specific recommendations. I'd like to follow up actually on a line of questioning Mr. DeFerranti was starting down. And I know that the Teen Network Board is only just now formally incorporating the work of the Healthy Relationships Task Force, which is a fantastic move for the structure of those two entities. And I know there's been a lot of overlap in the people already. Recognizing that you're only just sort of at the beginning of that effort, I wonder if our representatives might be able to share with us even anecdotal or observational comments on whether our students, especially our secondary students, are more likely, in your experience, to be taking advantage of resources for reporting and getting help after incidents of sexual assault or even intimate partner violence. I ask because our board is considering requests from our provider of crisis accompaniment services and counseling services after having seen a 1,400% increase in accompaniments, for example, after sexual assault. So I would love to get any insights from our youth population because, you are so critically affected by this issue, whether you're seeing data that indicates increasing amounts of reporting or students taking advantage of these resources or even just observing it in conversation.
Yeah, I would leave that for the partnership with the data. We're not so keen on that, but as my opinions on HRT, I feel like that's a great way as being a part, since we're very incorporated in Arlington, not only with high schoolers, middle schoolers, elementary schoolers. So it'd be a great opportunity to be able to tackle those issues, student on student, child as child, teen on teen, on a more personal level.
All right, so Ms. Garvey, if we can do one final quick question.
One final question, thank you, because we've got you here, and you guys are great spokespeople. So you talked about stresses. We've always heard about stress, and it seems to get worse as we go on, as hard as we try. What are the biggest stressors for our students today?
I'm gonna have to go with probably balancing sports and school. Also having to balance just friendships, and especially if we take it into even, when it comes to drug issues that within schools, it can get hard if you have a friend who happened to do something that wasn't necessarily good. It's hard to kind of leave them, so that can put some stress on you, be like, hey, this is a good guy, but he did something and I don't want that in my life. That's a big stress. Again, balancing school with other things. Personally, I'm involved in Sea Cadets with H.E. Newberry Division down at the Navy Yard. I'm also in TNB. I play varsity lacrosse, and currently, thankfully, I somehow have all A's. So it does get stressful. So if I had to pick one specific thing, it would just be time management and having to balance out different activities.
Yeah. I have a question for that question. Do you mean in particular students in Arlington County or students in America?
I did mean in Arlington County because that's the one area we could at least try to affect a little bit.
I feel like Arlington County has such great statistics for kids going to college, and people move here for schools. Personally, as a kid, there's a lot more stress academically, and being the top of your class, being pushed for AP classes. I know Washington Lee, a lot of students transfer for IB for the degree. Wakefield now has AP, has an AP capstone. Yorktown students go to Ivy Leagues. I think that's a big stress now, especially with social media and a mix of both. We're, as Marshall said, juggling school, juggling the title of representing Arlington well as students, and social media is a big play on that.
So on that one, the previous two come from sort of your cohort, your friends, but the other maybe comes from adults in your lives. Do you feel a lot of, how do you feel adults are handling this pressure? Do you think you feel a little bit too pushed, or do you think it's about right? What do you think? And maybe that's just person by person and not a general.
I feel like as you get older, as a high schooler, I don't know if you guys remember your junior year, but at that point, you're kind of stressing about your AP exams, your SATs, and I think that there needs to be somewhere or a counselor in the school to help the transition into adulthood, because I know a lot of kids who are kind of lost, who don't know where to go, and they need help with balancing all those things.
That's great. That's a very helpful answer. Thank you.
Thank you. On that, we will excuse Ms. Melendez, Mr. McGuire. We hope you have a very fulfilling, happy, but not too fun spring break.
Thank you for giving us this opportunity.
We'll see you again soon. Thank you. Next, we'll invite up the Partnership for Children, Youth, and Families. It's on.
Hello, I'm Dr. Sheila Fleischecker. I'm the chair of the Arlington Partnership for Children, Youth, and Family, which is a community-led advisory composed of 16 community members and 8 designated members from our school and county government, along with other youth stakeholders. We want to thank you for inviting us for participating in the various work sessions throughout this process, drawing from our 2019 community report. We reflected on the budget, and we'll be drawing a lot from the data today. And for your knowledge, LGBT is page 38. Rebecca's here with me, and she knows everything by page number, so very handy. But anyways, we reflected on the budget with our 3 priorities. One is to prioritize mental, social, emotional well-being of our youth, support our school and county's role in developing the whole child, and to promote equity by addressing disparities in health and community conditions identified by the Destination 2027 that disproportionately affect at-risk populations in our school. Our letter provides a little bit more thorough analysis. Today, I'll just highlight some main concerns or recommendations in 3 areas. Our first area, as echoed from the Teen Network Board earlier, is promoting youth mental health and wellness. The partnership consistently advocates for student services addressing mental health. Therefore, we have concerns about postponing the additional school psychologists and social workers, as explained on page 36 of the community report. 1 in 3 students in Arlington High School reported feeling sad or hopeless for 2 or more consecutive weeks during the prior year. Of particular concern is 6% of high school students reported they attempted suicide in the past year. Self-reported experiences of depression and thinking about suicide, we're hiring girls in middle and high school. Our community report demonstrates disparities across racial groups, with Latino youth reporting a higher incidence of depression and attempted suicide, and LGBTQ+ youth reporting higher rates of depressive symptoms. Similar to national data, only 30% of Arlington youth who are reporting depressive symptoms said they received any help. Black and Asian students reported they received little to no help. While efforts have been undertaken to increase staffing ratios for student services, our current ratio of high school psychologists and social workers to students is 1 to 1,070 in high schools and 1 to 1,090 in middle schools. It's far from meeting the best practices or national recommendations of 1 to 650. As school enrollment increases, and as we are learning more about the mental health needs, including eating disorders, of our increasingly diverse students, APS should be adding these resources more aggressively, not less so. Another concern is at-risk populations will be more disproportionately affected if the following positions are cut: elementary school library assistants, diversity peer training coordinators, equity and excellence coordinators, and special education coordination time. But assessing these proposed cuts is problematic in the absence of performance metrics and a concrete understanding of each school's ability to manage the workload associated with these cuts. The Teen Network Board strongly advocated for these coordinators. Without question, as explained on page 21, and as you guys discussed earlier, our adult supports are a key factor in mitigating negative experiences in the life of a young person. So we need to ensure investments in staff have the adequate training, time, and capacity to build positive, supportive relationships with our young people. Over the last year, the Partnership's Youth Mental Health Wellness Committee has made progress in helping to strengthen collaborations and information sharing across the school and county. As one example, and we're really proud of, Arlington's Behavioral Health Bureau now offers same-day access to family mental health services. Still more is needed, and we call on the boards to identify concrete collaborative steps, such as conducting a comprehensive evaluation of existing programs and services. The partnership also asks the county and the school to consider how our various surveys can be utilized to evaluate increases in class size, particularly among high-risk groups. Moving to our second area, providing transportation for access to experiential learning and physical activity. The following proposed cuts appear to disproportionately affect at-risk populations and do not provide sufficient data nor evidence of engagement by impacted populations. These include proposals to eliminate summer sports practice transportation, funding for discretionary and non-discretionary field trips, transportation for middle school and high school games and practice, late and activity bus service, activities at the outdoor lab, and then reductions proposed to the nature center hours and the various library service cuts. Our third and final area, fostering family support and community engagement. We advocate for continued support for efforts to help our most at-risk families, such as Project Healthy Families. We encourage the county and school to continually mobilize community volunteers and advisory groups like ours where possible. For example, Healthy Communities Action Team, known as HCAT, has a grant that could be used to support stronger implementation of the local school wellness councils, and HCAT could support county programs such as monitoring vendor compliance for Fit Arlington Healthy Vending Initiative nutrition standards. County and school boards should continue to make appropriate investments where needed to promote more inclusive engagement in our school and county decision-making processes. Efforts to identify best practices for building diversity within commission membership are essential. In summary, we recognize the challenge for making budget decisions and addressing a range of pressing needs. We encourage both the county and school boards to continue collaborative, strategic, data-informed, and community-engaged assessments of our spending, cost efficiencies, and investments, especially areas that impact our children, youth, and families. To better inform fiscal 2021 budget decision-making processes, we do recommend that the school and county adopt an overall equity policy that invests and also invest in hiring senior-level equity officers that are charged with putting equity in action as recommended by Destination 2027. Thank you for your time today and throughout this process, and I welcome any questions.
Dr. Fleischaker, thank you very much, and thank you so much for your very diligent engagement with the Destination 2027 work, in addition to everything else that you do. Do you have any questions for Sheila, Dr. Fleischaker? Ms. Garvey.
Yeah, I found myself fascinated when the students were talking about Fairfax County putting together this mental health. Are you doing some, because are you doing some things with Fairfax, or at least aware of what's going on in Fairfax? Because we all kind of have the same issues. I wonder sometimes if there can be some
I hear
Cooperation.
anecdotally more so what's going on in Fairfax, so I do think maybe through the partnership, maybe we can invite them for a thorough presentation on that. That might be one way to get better informed about what they're doing.
Very useful. Either it's something we want to also try here, or maybe it could be something we could, cooperate on together. I don't know.
Yeah, and Fairfax, I mean, they're doing some things like all school annual assessments of mental health, so there's some controversy about whether or not that should be done. We're doing it in selected grades, not continually and annually. So I think, bits and pieces of what they're doing would be useful. They're a larger system, but I do think maybe through the partnership or other means, we should invite them to get more thorough feedback about what we can do.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Any other questions? Or no? So thank you so much. And I'm going to just take a moment of personal privilege, since you stepped away from the mic for a moment, Mr. Chair, to recognize Judy Haddon. Judy Haddon and I worked together to help establish the partnership. There were other folks too, but we go way back, and it's delightful to see her here. This has been going on for a while, and it's kind of exciting to see how it kind of keeps growing. And really appreciate you coming. This is really valuable. And I look forward to hearing about, things moving forward and what's going on in Fairfax and cooperation. Yes, Ms. Talento.
Yes, I'm processing all the information received, but I think there were two questions from the prior discussion that we were going to leave for the APCYF. And one
Very
was
good point.
on LGBTQ, was it LGBTQ?
Sure, yeah, it's pointed out on page 38.
The question actually was whether that's a new type of data that we didn't collect before and when we started.
Becca could elaborate on the trends. We are providing new information on that as it expanded on the transgender in particular. But one thing to point out particularly for our LGBT community is they report adult support just similarly across the board with our other teens. So I think, again, when you're thinking about assets with that community, that's a particularly important one. And then you had a question particularly about eating disorders. It's not picked up very well in YRBS. There are questions within that. I mean, I have a PhD in nutrition science, so I just know generally it's a small community, but an important community, and often not self-reported really well.
Right.
But it is often sometimes the inroads for that is thinking through, I don't know Arlington County, but particularly within high schools and or middle school, the sports programs, both in schools and county, that's often a good way to address it in terms of just what's healthy eating and a kind of identifying disordered eating amongst kids.
Well,
but
yeah.
athletes aren't the only ones,
No,
so it's
and
important.
actually what my experience has been with youth is that a lot of times it's not athletes.
And it often is kids who have weight issues, so it's the other way of them trying to cope with weight management.
That's a challenge that we've been experiencing, is that a lot of, there are people who don't have weight issues grappling with this, and people who may not be athletes, but that is what I've learned in studying it, because I've known families who have been working with it, is that it's something that goes undetected and something that ends up causing the disability of mental health in their later years in college or even in their 20s, but it's starting in the high schools. And so the questions on the youth survey were not questions that would invite a person to share that. And so that's what I was asking. Sometimes youth know more about what's happening in their community than us as adults who are only on the sidelines. But with some of the families that I have worked with, they're finding out about this in ways that aren't expected. So when I read the Youth Risk Behavior Survey last year and saw the questions, those questions will not bring that about. So I was seeing if they had heard it, and that would be my feedback for that. And I don't know if Katie Crystal's question was answered either. I don't remember what it was, but so those are the ones. But thank you for providing the feedback on the eating disorder piece.
And with that, Katie, is there anything you'd like to get in on here, or are you good?
Thank you. No, I'm fine, Chair Dorsey. I appreciate it. I was had asked a little bit for the team perspective on the Healthy Relationships Task Force issue of whether students are more likely to be availing themselves of services for survivors of sexual assault, but we can follow up separately with the partnership on that.
Terrific. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you, Sheila. And with that, we will move to a discussion on the school board, which has had a very busy prior 24 hours, busy week in finalizing your proposed budget. We're anxious to hear what you've come up with, and I'll turn it over to Chair of the School Board, Reed Goldstein.
Thank you very much, Chair Dorsey, Vice Chair Garvey, members DeFerranti and Gutschall, and Crystal on the phone. So we're delighted to be here. We've been looking forward to this for even more than 24 hours, for quite a while, to bring our proposed budget to you. As you know, we just adopted that proposed budget last night. Also recognize Mr. Schwartz, the county manager, and our superintendent, Dr. Murphy. Somebody, am I cueing you on the slides? Okay. And so we have a decent-sized presentation, but I'm going to try and run through it quickly because I know you have questions, and we also don't want to, as you say, it's the beginning of spring break. We don't want to stay here all night. So can we go to the next slide, please? So first, so this is an overview of the agenda. And then the next slide, please. So let me start with some thank yous. And first, I want to thank our staff and our community and our board member, which of course is all of our community, and our board members who provided invaluable input to this budget all the way through the budget process. And without their input, this budget could not have taken the shape that it does. So it really is important to say that all of these inputs from different people have a critical role in creating this budget. So next slide, please. And we want to say thank you to you, folks, because you and us are responsible for this significant situation we find ourselves in here in Arlington County, pretty much at the top of the charts in almost any metric you look at. So, yeah, so thank you for the focus on economic development with the recent acquisition of, these commercial entities. Go to the next slide, please. Thank you for the strong support, the long history of support for our budgets. As you can see in this graphic, budgets have been growing. You have all been supporting them over the years. The next slide, please. And we're all proud to be living in the best place in America. And according to Niche, and also according to Niche, APS is the #1 school system in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So we want to say thank you to you folks for the support that we've received as a result, that results in, some of these high rankings for you and for us. And going to the next slide, it's a result of the kind of collaboration that we have that has led to our success. And the next one, thank you. And this is a kind of a short list of the kinds of collaboration that we enjoy, APS and Arlington County government, in a bunch of different areas, advisory groups and the working collaboration, of course, with the budget. And the results of our joint successes are that, Arlington County is a very, very desirable place to live. It's got great transportation options, a strong job market, diverse housing options, low crime rate, and Arlington Public Schools is similarly very, very desirable and a significant attraction feature for Arlington because of our low class sizes, our high instructional quality, which leads to high success metrics, strong community support for school funding, for which we are profoundly grateful because, as you know, we have a relatively low percentage of households with school-age children. Nevertheless, they all have been strong support for the schools. And moving to our current budget challenges, but kind of paradoxically, all of that good stuff brings challenges because people want to move here, and they want to move here a little bit more quickly than we can provide permanent seats for them. So our recipe in APS for student success is that we have low class sizes, we have a high quality staff, and we provide robust student supports. And we take great pride in this and the kind of student supports that we have, which include inclusive opportunities and inclusive environments and choices and opportunities and differentiation in the classroom. And this recipe for student success results in high graduation rates and low dropout rates and successful outcomes for students, whether they are college or career bound. Want to make sure everybody knows and understands this and sees it. And it's probably not the last time you're going to see this in this presentation, but this graph epitomizes a lot of what's going on in Arlington County. So starting with 2007, our enrollment started angling up at a significant rate, which is virtually unchanged in the past 10, 11 years and is projected to stay unchanged for the next 10 years. And this is bringing us challenges. So last year, year before last, in 2017, we broke the record for the most APS students ever, which includes the baby boom years following World War II. And it's just been going up relentlessly since then. And interestingly, our cost per pupil has not been going up at the same rate that our enrollment's going up. So our cost per pupil line is, relatively flat there on the bottom, the black line on the bottom. And that red line on top is the enrollment. But the gray line in the middle is cost per pupil adjusted for inflation. And if you start with that far left figure in FY09, $19,538, and you adjusted it for inflation, then when you get out to fiscal 2020 at the far right, you would expect us to be spending $23,747 per student. But in fact, we're spending $19,900. And this the superintendent's proposed budget had a cost per pupil of a little bit over $20,000 per student. But because of some of the changes we've made, including what we did last night, we brought that down underneath the $20,000 threshold. Also want to point out that we tightened the belt last year. We took reductions in fees, reductions or fee increases of $11.4 million. That included changes in the planning factors. We partially postponed growth initiatives like a 3-year increase of psychologists and social workers. This was done last year. We eliminated some benefits like parental leave and the Live Where You Work program and cellular services. And next slide, please. And so getting on the budget journey that has brought us to this place today, we started planning this budget last spring, probably, almost the day after the last budget was adopted. We started with an initial deficit of $43 million. We pulled together our team of senior leaders and principals who worked to find reductions. We balanced. We did a very robust and significant balancing act. We tried to look for items to reduce, to find items that we could find reductions in that went beyond the standards of quality. Standards of quality, of course, require that there be a teacher in front of a classroom and things like that. But there are other parts of the school system's budget, and that's where we looked to find reductions. And the superintendent's proposed budget reflected this kind of work, and the shortfall was pared down to just under $20 million before we then took some reductions. If you go to the next slide, please. And we reduced $11.3 million in that budget. So we scrubbed the numbers. We took a $10 million cut in what is popularly known as Tier 1. That brought our gap down to $8.9 million. Our spring revenue and enrollment update resulted in additional savings of $1.6 million as we recalculated the number of students and the costs for those students that we'll be seeing in September. That brought our gap down to $7.3 million. And then last night, the school board's proposed budget includes additional reductions of $1.2 million, resulting in a new gap from the school board's proposed budget of $6.8 million. And you can see here, just in simple round terms, our expenditures compared to our total revenue, and that results in a gap of $6.8 million on a total budget of almost $670 million. We built the budget starting with expenditures that in many cases are unique. So we are opening 5 new schools or programs this fall. 2 brand new construction buildings, 1 significant addition, building with significant additions and movement of a program in one case, and opening of a new neighborhood school in the 5th case. We are projecting an additional 1,000 students in September. This is after we say goodbye to approximately 1,800 seniors. In June this year, we're going to be saying hello to about 2,300 kindergartners. So 1,000 additional students on top of what we have this year. And that enrollment growth costs us a little bit over $7 million. We have a compensation package. We have built that into the budget. And in addition, we are in the 3rd year of a 3-year rollout to adjust some positions for the market, who we've found have been under market for too long. Then we have the continuing growth initiatives like Arlington Tech, like continuing to fill out the psychologists and the social workers, bus drivers and attendants, safety and security needs, and then we're also making investments to support growth because we can't stay static. The job isn't just to find ways to replicate what we did last year, but we need to look forward to the school system we want to be as we enter the 3rd decade of the 21st century. So we added a modest amount of investments to support that growth. And moving to, I think I mentioned this, didn't I? The compensation increase. This is in line with our strategic plan goal of having an engaged workforce. We need to recruit and retain a high-quality staff. This is instrumental to our attractiveness here in Arlington Public Schools. There is a national teacher shortage, and we had been largely insulated from it at first, but now we're finding that it is affecting us. It's probably not affecting us as badly as some other jurisdictions nationwide, but it is starting to affect us. So I heard an example from our recent recruitment fair, which was about 3 weeks ago, and we were looking for certain specialty skills, and we were prepared to offer early contracts for those specialty skills. And we found 4 people with these specialty skills. 2 of them were bilingual, and we offered them early contracts, and all 4 of them turned us down because the salary level was not adequate. Now, we're not just, in this case, these were speech and language pathologists, and we're not just competing with surrounding jurisdictions, although we are competing with surrounding jurisdictions, but not exclusively. In that case, we're also competing with the healthcare industry, but competition is competition, and we need those skills also. And, you know, surrounding jurisdictions have caught up to and surpassed APS pay steps in many cases. We used to be on top in many of the scale steps. A lot of the surrounding jurisdictions have figured out the magic formula now. And I need to point out that every year we have a step increase that by policy is built into the superintendent's proposed budget, but we don't have a decision yet on the exact configuration of the compensation package, and we're waiting to see what you all do on April 23rd. And after that, we'll make that final decision. We used reserves, our strategic use of reserves, to help bring our budget into line to a point where we have now this, much smaller gap that we all feel we can stand behind. And use of our reserves was critical in building this budget. And as you can see, we started with $51 million in a total set of reserves, although some of it was already earmarked. Our capital reserve was earmarked from our recent CIP. And after we use these reserves, we're down to $4.8 million, and typically take opportunities of closeout and things like that to refill that. But without those reserves, we would be in a different place right now. And then we took, thank you. We took reductions to close the gap. Reductions were built into the superintendent's proposed budget on increasing class size. This was also in the budget last year. We managed to postpone that increase in class size by the use of one-time funds. But this is a reduction that is in our proposed budget this year. Benefits changes, efficiencies in Department of Teaching and Learning, and all of these things, this $10.1 million is already built into the budget that you will see that we're presenting here. And then last night, the school board took additional reductions to bring the gap, make the gap smaller. And those were in central office, and also some reductions in schools through the FLES program and the middle school pathways program. And so we found about $1.2 million in additional reductions there. And then as I said, we need to invest in our future. So we found a modest amount of additions that we felt we needed to make as we look forward to greater efficiencies for the next few years. These are going to be in accelerating our diversity efforts. We're planning on hiring a chief diversity officer. This is part of our strategic plan goal. Partnerships, strong and mutually supportive partnerships. We're hiring a partnership coordinator, and we've also invested in some studies, compensation studies, budget studies, to rationalize and reconfigure some of our compensation potentially. And of course, the Art Bus pilot that has been referred to earlier this evening that we are funding in order to try and get that up and running at the beginning of the next school year. So in short, the school board's proposed budget is found here on this slide. Superintendent's proposed budget was $672 million. Our spring update provided some savings of almost $2 million. School board took some reductions of $1.2 million and then added some about 700,000. And we have come out with a proposed budget of $669 million, 669.3, I don't have the exact number right here, which includes a gap of $6.8 million that we are going to ask you to close. So finally, we want to maintain our tradition of excellence. And when I say our, I mean both APS and Arlington County. And so for a fully funded budget, I think we saw this slide before, expenditures of almost $670 million against revenues of $662 million leaves a gap of 6.8. So we're presenting a fully funded budget that represents efficiencies in operations. It maintains some supports that allow students to thrive regardless of income, learning, and language differences, or other opportunity gaps, and investing in some studies that could lead to future efficiencies and competitive salaries, and a collaborative art bus pilot that could help strengthen our county bus systems and create efficiencies in the APS bus system in the future. And so the key takeaways for our presentation here are that we've already taken $11.3 million in budget reductions. We have worked hard to preserve excellent programs and services that have a direct impact on student success. And we are investing, we continue to invest in high-quality employees, and maybe the most significant of key takeaways is that a strong partnership between the county government and the school system is essential for all of our continued success. And again, it's nice to be living in the best place in America, the best school system in the Commonwealth. And that is the end of our presentation. I shall turn it back over to you, Chair Dorsey, and we're happy to entertain questions.
Terrific. Thank you, Chair Goldstein. And in the spirit of the gratitude that you expressed, let us express our gratitude for walking us through it. I think that was very helpful in helping us understand what you're trying to accomplish this budget and how it's evolved and some of the difficult choices, trade-offs, and conversations that you've had to make. So we very much appreciate that. This is always an interesting construct. You all, as an independent, autonomous body, have the ability to determine what to do with whatever transfer this board constructs as far as what we're going to give to you. However, we have this forum where the questions that we ask may appear to encroach on your turf. We don't do so intentionally. It's just to further and better our understanding about what you're trying to accomplish, since we all are extremely interested, and some of us are acutely involved in the work that you do on a daily basis. So with that, let's start the conversation with the county board. Ms. Crystal, I'm going to start with you just because you are on the phone. If you want, you can certainly wait until later if you would like to see the discussion evolve.
Thank you, Mr. Dorsey. My question or set of comments actually has a lot to do with our own budget and some of the efficiencies we're considering taking in an effort to better balance resources. It may make sense to allow our colleagues who have more direct questions about what Mr. Goldstein just presented.
We'll be happy to do that, and I'll make sure that we don't forget to call on you a little bit later.
Thank you.
I'll start us off. So the per pupil spending charts that you went through, it's always, I know a lot of people love the per pupil spending number because it's sort of easy to identify, but it's a flawed number in many reasons. We don't need to get into all those details now. And I appreciate your point, or the point that I took, that the school board has been very careful to control the growth of per pupil spending over the years, but I just do want to make clear, at least my own perspective, that per pupil spending shouldn't ever adjust naturally with inflation. That's not the way we would expect that to work in any world. So I think your point is well taken, that the school board has taken steps to control it, but that's one of those things that should not necessarily have a direct relationship with inflation. More to my point in the question is actually something about the other factors beyond our local transfer that influence that. And specifically, Arlington is among the it's probably one or two jurisdictions at most in the Commonwealth of Virginia that receive a lower state allotment in per pupil spending. And when it comes to federal spending as well, we're certainly not in a favorable percentile as well. So what are all of the factors that influence the relative low numbers in per pupil spending that we get from sources outside of the local transfer?
Thank you. I'm going to introduce my team of technical experts here who are probably going to be answering many of your questions. So as I mentioned, Dr. Murphy, the superintendent, but also Assistant Superintendent Leslie Peterson from Management and Finance. And I think that question could probably go to her for a more detailed answer than I could give. And we do have other of the senior staff in the room who may be available to answer your question. So let me ask Leslie if she can shed some light on your question.
Thank you.
Good evening. One of the reasons that we are at the bottom of the state's allocations for funding is that they do it based on the locality's, a measure of the locality's wealth. And to the state, Arlington County is a very wealthy county. I think anybody in this county would believe that. So they cap the amount of money that they allocate to school divisions that they find have a large measure of wealth. So we get one of the lowest, or the lowest amount of funding from the state anywhere. Now, the state says that they provide 20% of our budget, but as you know, they provide something quite a bit less than that. Overall, it's about 11% of our overall budget.
Thank you. And Ms. Peterson, that's one of the things I always thought, you know, that composite index and Arlington's relative affluence. But then when I looked at the data and relative rankings per pupil, I saw organizations similarly situated in an unfavorable position like Bath County and Goochland County. And while those are great counties in the Commonwealth, they are nowhere near Arlington's level of affluence. So I was wondering if there was anything else going on that, you know, put Arlington in the unenviable position of receiving such a low amount of state funding. Nothing that you can tell? All right. So any other questions? Mr. DeFerranti.
So my question actually has to do with slide 12, and it's concerns the much debated topic of enrollment growth. And I just want to make sure I understand, because you mentioned 1,000 students is the projected growth for next year. And I know that both the county and APS staff are working more closely together than ever on this. But am I right that the past year we saw a growth of about 400 and almost about 500 students? And my recollection is that that may be a little lower than we had thought, you know, a year ago or 2 years ago. And so I just want to make sure that's right, because I thought we were, you know, there was an 800 is the number that sticks in my head. But then, you know, if maybe staff is able to speak a little bit to why that projection, or how that projection goes up over the next year based on the work that the county and, you know, towards 1,000 students that you'd mentioned. And I don't know, you know, who'd be right. I don't want to get, you know, I don't need every last student. I'm just curious if I really was curious about the 500, if that's accurate, that was a little lower than we thought, and then what might be driving the higher number.
The 500 is accurate. It's maybe a little above 500.
Let me just introduce Lisa Stengel, who's our Executive Director for Planning and Evaluation, and knows these enrollment numbers much better than
Great, thanks.
any of us at this table.
Thank you.
So the number is accurate, your caption. I think the big piece is this year we've been working really hard to build off of what came out of the community facility study. We had an external consultant help us look at that information and, you know, sort of point out some areas where we needed to improve on sort of our data sharing and what we were doing. This year we really doubled down on how we went through the process. We had multiple people running the data independently, confirming that they got the same information, and when they didn't, we actually worked with the consultant to make sure that the processes we were using, we took the best path. We did multiple scenarios that sort of looked at high, mediums, and lows based on the long-term projections for new students born to mothers. You know, our hardest to estimate portion of the projections is our kindergarten population, because until they enroll in our schools, we don't know who they are or where they live. You know, so sometimes we're off by 1 or 2 kindergarten classes at each school. But in working with the county, we're using their projections and forecasts for mothers of childbearing age from 5 to 10 years, the 5 to 10 year projections. I think the bigger piece too is we're also really closely working with the forecast for housing, which we're seeing, you know, I think we're beginning to see a lot more things happening quicker than we probably were a couple of years ago.
Great, that's helpful. Thanks very much.
Mr. Gutschall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a quick follow-up to this line, it's very encouraging to know that our staffs are collaborating so that we are getting, hopefully, a little bit more fidelity to the projections. But no matter what we do in terms of more input into the models, there's always variability that nobody at this table we can influence, but we cannot control what's going to happen precisely in the future. Who's going to choose to have kids? Who's going to choose to stay where in the county as they have kids? Who's going to move into the county? So there's the housing that comes into it, of course. So it's good that we are collaborating on this, but I would just encourage, and I think this goes, frankly, this is more of a comment than a question, that whenever we look at these projections into the out years, you talked, Ms. Stingel, about running the high, medium, low, that I would prefer to actually see some range, some high, medium, low out there, because I think it's important that anyone else who might come across this data understands that there is variability here and that we're planning, hopefully, to make sure, as I always say, I hate to use the moniker, you know, hope for the best, plan for the worst, because to me, a burgeoning school system is actually not a worst case scenario. That's a sign of a great, healthy community. We do have to be able to respond for that, but nonetheless, I would say that we want to make sure that we have planning and we have some framework in place to make sure that we will have the schools and the seats for however many kids we're going to have on into these out years. And the interesting thing for me is when you go back and you look at the start of the uptick there in 2007, 2008, if you really graph that out now, it seems to the naked eye here at this resolution nearly a straight line projection on out. And if we were to continue that line, we would be looking at within certainly the time period that I feel responsible for planning today, we would be looking at continued significant growth in the school system. So all of that is really just by way of saying thank you for the work that's happening among the staffs, and a lot more work still to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Garvey.
Yeah, thank you. That was a great presentation, Reed. It was good. Yeah, it was very thorough and kind of to the point, and I really appreciate it. And while I'm doing thank yous, you know, you noted, you thanked us for bringing, you know, Nestle and Amazon and it really is a group, and particularly on Amazon, I know your school staff worked really, really hard. There was a lot of effort there, and it really was a team effort, which really succeeded quite a bit. So I think we've been working really well together. Buildings, I hear people saying, particularly the one across on Wilson. Everybody's just saying how gorgeous that is. You know, they're really beautiful. So, thank you for that. I think you guys are doing a great job. I want to check something on if we fund that 6.8 gap. That will mean that you don't have to take the tier 2 cuts, right? We've all heard a lot about field trips and minority achievement. I think you may have a different name for it now, but coordinators and some library assistants. My understanding is if we provide that 6.8 million, you won't have to take that cuts, and I want to just make sure that that's the case.
Yeah, there's been a lot of confusion about the tier cuts. They are not officially part of the budget in that they do not affect the bottom line. They are recommendations by the superintendent that if we don't get the gap closed, and that gap originally was 8.9 million, and those tier 2 cuts total 8.9 million. If we don't get that gap closed, those were his suggestions about places we could reduce to, you know, close that gap ourselves. We're not at 8.9 million anymore, but to your question, that is correct. If the gap were to be closed, we would not need to take reductions from tier 2 or from anywhere.
That's great, and that's good to know, and I want to get that out to make, because I think it's been a little confusing.
Can I just
people. Yes, no, go right ahead.
Just
go right ahead.
because I do think the cuts, as you have outlined them, that were negotiated or that were displayed in tiers, That's one option that you all as a board could follow. You could also make adjustments within what's described in those tiers. So instead of taking all of a particular cut, you could take some, you could design things differently. So what people have seen listed could in fact, regardless of the transfer amount, be different than what you all eventually adopt in May.
That's correct.
Okay.
And, you know, of course, we're not limited to that list that's in Tier 2 or Tier 3. Again, we've already built in the Tier 1 cuts, but we would not be limited to that. We have 600. I'm sorry?
We did take a few, and I'm aware that you took a
We
few.
built the budget on the Tier 1 cuts, and then we did take some Tier 2 cuts already. But I think in response to your question, if that gap were closed, we wouldn't have to take any more, and we are not limited to only that set of tier cuts when looking at potential reductions.
But the reason we're building the Socratic questioning is you just want to make clear to our community, ultimately, authority for this budget rests with you. You could determine, regardless of what level of funding that we give you, to make further adjustments in program and service delivery that could reflect what people are viewing as tiered cuts. That's still your prerogative.
Correct.
Thank you. Thank you. No, thank you. That's good clarification, because I think it is important, because a lot of people are, you know, obviously focusing on this. I want to say I'm pleased that you've left in a number of studies and looking to the future and needing to do some planning. That, of course, I think studies could be one-time money. We always get into this one-time and ongoing, so that's great. And I think one of the things that I'm sort of pleased about is we've got significant growth coming, we know, but I think we also have some significant resources coming, which will make it easier. So we need to get it through this year and the next. It's not like our problems are going to be all over. We're going to still have issues that we need to deal with, but I think it will get a little bit of the pressure will ease up as we start to get better resources because of this economic development going on. So, and so I'm comfortable with, you know, with the one time for certainly for these studies, and it may be that there may be some ongoing that you'd use a little one time to just kind of make that bridge for the next year or two till we get those resources coming in.
All right, I'm sorry, you want to
I
respond?
just wanted to mention that discussion about one-time versus ongoing is a significant part of the technical balance in building the budget. I didn't feel it was necessary to bring it to this presentation, but it is definitely there that we can talk to you about the.
No, that I don't want to get into that. In some years past, people have obsessed about one time and ongoing. I just kind of want to tell you I'm feeling fairly relaxed about it because of the situation we're in. Thank you.
Mr. DeFerranti.
I appreciate Ms. Garvey's, Vice Chair Garvey's comments. I kind of would say I'm in a similar position with respect to the sort of total fidelity to one-time versus ongoing would be a slightly different scenario for me if we had not just, if we were not in a situation where at least some of the economic growth I think will help address concerns. I know that both the manager and the superintendent are groaning inside at this, at me being that honest, but I do think it's, I want to, if any of you have particular thoughts on that, I'd love to hear philosophically if you have thoughts on that, on Ms. Garvey's point. So that's sort of one thought. And then, because I was so involved in the schools, I want to stay big picture, but I do think at some point it would be helpful for me to, for us to see at a high level the educators' data, the compensation data, because a few conversations recently, it's been brought home more than ever, more than last year for sure to me, of the competition that you cited, those 4 individuals. So I don't know, you know, if there's a way to just slide me the right set of data, big picture on that. At some point it would be helpful just to know the competition that other jurisdictions like Fairfax and Alexandria, et cetera, just to be aware of that, because I don't think as a policy matter for all of us that we would want to be in a circumstance where we are not competitive with our educators and compensating our educators equitably.
So a second one first, you're looking for metrics on the recruitment effort what we find, who's applying, and how we're.
Or just compensation at a high level. Usually there's some analysis that goes very high level of compensation and compensation.
I think you probably want the WABE guide, the Washington Area Boards of Education. So Ms. Van Dorn has just shared with you. We got it to you.
Thank you.
All right, I think I'm next in my own perceived line of who's going to be called on. So a couple of quick questions. Back to per pupil spending. Do we ever break down these data, Ms. Peterson, in terms of per pupil spending for instruction and then per pupil spending for support services, or is it just all on the aggregate?
There's not really a breakdown per se by dollar, but there is in the WABE guide that Mr. DeFerranti is looking at right now, a breakdown between school-based and non-school-based staff across all the jurisdictions, and we do fairly well when we look at that measure.
But nothing in terms of instructional and then support? Okay.
No.
And then the next question, and this is gonna sound much more critical than I intend. I'm trying to elicit sort of the process and what are some of the tensions that you all had in your budget negotiations. But in actual numbers, you ended up with a $7.3 million deficit. You made reductions further, 1.2 million, additions of approximately 0.7. So we're talking about net $500,000 in savings in a $600 and some odd million budget. In the abstract, that doesn't seem like a lot of movement, but I know that you all went through a lot of dynamics. So can you tell us about some of the issues that emerged with producing that bottom line?
Well, I think when we started out, we began to look at where the core was and what directly impacted the classroom. So that was kind of the decision with the groups that we worked with. I know that's what the board looked at too, in how we wanted to preserve that, because ultimately it's about students learning. We also then looked at those that support the classroom and then the systems. So it's kind of like concentric circles that we built out from. I think that's how we arrived at making the initial reduction of the $10 million. The board had directed me to come back with efficiencies, and so that's what we did, and then we built around that. I think a lot of what we have in Arlington is a result of some of the things that Mr. Goldstein pointed out. We have the low class sizes. We have high-quality teachers, and then we have the supports to instruction both in and outside the classroom around some of the things we talked about already today, mental health with our counseling staff, with our psychs and social workers, with our math coaches, and all of those things, I think, become very integral to the whole picture.
Okay. Works for me. And Mr. Gutschall.
Thank you. I'm going to shift gears just a little bit, no pun intended, and talk about art buses. So, and the work that the JCTC has been doing with the ACTC. And I know Ms. Van Dorn has been taking a leadership role on this and greatly appreciate that. So I have to say it was news to me. I was pleased to learn, I just heard this in your presentation, Mr. Goldstein, that there is some, you guys are including in your proposed budget now, some funding for a pilot program to allow for more students to be able to use art buses to get to school and to get around. Where can I find out more information about that? Actually, if you can just point me in the right direction.
Nancy, do you want to fill in some information here?
I'll take that. The staff's just still working on it. There's not really a written proposal. It's something that's being discussed in ACTC and the JCTC, which is the joint staff, two staffs, are working on this very, very hard. It's complicated. Bottom line, the grease that was going to help move it was some money, because it came down to funding. Were you all going to basically provide free passes, or were we going to fund the passes for the kids to be on the bus? Money had to be put on the table for a variety of reasons, and Dr. Murphy thought it was a good idea for us to, at this point, as the pilot, to fund it. So the detail, there's nothing written up. The detail is between the staff still, and they're moving on that. It's at the staff level still.
Can I ask how much money you've
It's $100,000.
$100,000, and was that some back of the envelope calculation in terms of number of students that would be served by that? And
I'll go a little bit further with some of the staff discussion. We're really looking at around the Career Center, serving through art buses about 200 students. That's kind of what we've got in the catchment. And so we believe that with the amount of money that we've allocated, we can serve approximately those 200 students that come and go to the Career Center. So that's the initial idea. The art bus routes lay out very nicely, so there's potential for the students to access the routes and the buses in that particular area. So that's where we are now. It's a small enough pilot also that we felt we could learn from it and that it would be manageable. And I think some of the infrastructure is there and ready to go.
I think that it's probably the hope of all of us that eventually this pilot will lead to, in the long run, some cost savings, presumably. But I would anticipate that this is, right now for you guys, this is an additional $100K outlay. You're not able to recoup that in reduced yellow bus service.
Not at this time, because the reason is we're growing. So this will probably, if anything, slow some of that growth with bus transportation. But the fact that we're growing and increasing in students, we're going to continue to have to expand the fleet. So hopefully we can learn something from this. I know you folks are going through some things with the art bus system, and I think we are, to get these two things to marry together, that art bus system, from my knowledge, is going to have to become a little bit more robust to complement the yellow system.
I'll yield the floor, but one final question is the 100K and that rough 200 students, is that then for a full year of the pilot program?
Absolutely, yes.
Excellent. Thank you guys for stepping up and doing that.
Ms. Garvey.
Yeah, and then
Can I just add something very quickly to that? We're all very excited about this, and we were very excited as the idea began to snowball, I think, starting last fall, about an art bus pilot for us. And I won't repeat that there's been, a few hiccups or speed bumps, no pun intended here, in getting this to happen. So when the idea came up that we fund it and put it in the budget, we were all on that idea. We really liked that idea because we are really looking forward to having this pilot working, bringing information to us, bringing hopefully good results to us sooner rather than later.
Ms. Garvey?
Yeah, thank you. And then I think probably nobody's here to answer my question now, and I think I'll just take a briefing later. I'd be like to know on our side, what is that extra $100,000 for? What is their cost? Are we putting on extra buses? Because I think we have some capacity. And anyway, I'd like to know what it's really costing us, because I'm a little surprised. I thought we might be supporting you a little bit more in this. I'm really pleased that we're moving forward on it, but I'd like a little more information. So, Mr. Manager, I don't expect you to know that right now off the top of your head, but
Mr. Schwartz will follow up at some other time. Mr. DeFranti?
Given the chair's focus and all of our shared concern about equity, I'm mindful, I saw the partnership position that you added in, the partnerships position, which I think could have some equity implications, and then appreciate your leadership on the additional position on diversity, which I think is, of course, equity is linked in there. And so either now, briefly, if you want to, I want to make sure that you have the opportunity if there's anything standing out in a big way, or if you wanted to follow up afterwards, I'd just be curious if you have sort of budget-related thoughts as to new investments or continued investments or areas where you think what you're doing is going to help educational equity, because, of course, nationally we have a challenge with addressing opportunity gaps. And, you don't have to go on. You all know that we've talked about this at other times, but I would want to at least ask that question so that you have the opportunity either now or later to sort of things that stand out that you think are key investments towards equity.
I'm going to ask Monique O'Grady to address your question. First, I want to point out that we are in an effort to define equity for ourselves, and Mr. Dorsey and I are appearing before the Superintendent's Advisory Committee on Equity and Excellence in about 10 days, where no doubt we will be talking more about this. But, this is, of course, the buzzword of the moment, and figuring out what it means and how we address it is going to be critical in both our efforts and our budget efforts. But I think Monique would probably like to add a little something to that.
Thank you, Chair Goldstein. I would. As many of you know, we are a majority minority school district, and we want to ensure that all of our students are meeting all of the educational promise that APS offers. And so we have seen for a few decades that we have been focusing on achievement for all of our students. In previous strategic plans, we said we were going to reduce the achievement gap. The strategic plan I focused on and worked on as a regular person in the community prior to the one we're working on now, we said we were going to eliminate it. And now we've changed our language from basically whether the child is really the issue or whether it's us. And we now are looking at eliminating opportunity gaps. And so as we start to look at what we can do to ensure that we're doing everything we can to make sure that the children who come to us, who I believe are ready to embrace everything we have to offer, we think it is time to bring someone on board who can look at all of our operations, whether it's regarding our staff, and the education we offer our students, to be able to take a broad lens and figure out what we can do to ensure that the dollars we spend are reaching all of our students in a way that they all can be highly successful. And I think that's important because in the most recent strategic plan, with the change in the way that we're addressing this, it's not just a one-issue focus. It's a focus across everything we do. Equity has been woven into our strategic plan in a way to ensure across the board that everything is being done. And to have a person to take a look at that across the board, I think that's important. A year ago, I attended the Minority Student Achievement Network Conference in Madison, Wisconsin. I will return this year with two of my colleagues. We'll be leaving on Sunday. And during that conference, I sought out people who have similar positions at other public school districts. And one of the things I learned was the first thing you need to do before you bring on an equity officer is to make sure you have an equity policy, so that when the person comes on board, they have the ability to be able to say, I'm doing this because this is what the community wants. Over the last year, I've seen our community move to saying that this is what they want, to the point that they've woven it into so much of what we're doing. Not just for our students of color, but our students who come with different learning differences, for our LGBTQ community. For so many of our students, this person can take that lens and ensure that every dollar we're spending, we're getting the most effect. And I think that I'm excited about us moving forward to do that. And with our recent report that we had that took a look at our diversity and what we can do to make sure we're maximizing it, it was suggested that we move in this direction. So I've been looking at this for a year. When we go back to Madison next week, I'll be looking at more to move us forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And where we can partner on equity, that I think is also, where we can stretch together or figure out how we can work together on it. We can follow up afterwards, but I know that that's an interest of all of ours as well. So. And
if I could add there, thank you, Mr. DeFrente. I also think the timing is especially good because that is a focus of the county board right now as well. And so as you're working on that, having a person in place who can work collaboratively to ensure that we're understanding what you're doing and looking for efficiencies and ways that we can be collaborative as well, I think also helps with the timing of putting this position forward. Thank you.
So if I could follow up in this conversation, and I know Mr. DeFerranti and maybe perhaps others have met with members from Wakefield High School who are engaged in cohorts or otherwise engaged with Office of Equity and Excellence staff members. And in referring to your slide 11, the recipe for student success, in the way that you very passionately described it, Chair Goldstein, I was struck that at least the 25 students who came to my office after spring break this afternoon very much reflected the spirit of the recipe for success that was here. And I'm going to channel them in something that doesn't really require a response at this point, but and recognizing that it's fully your board and superintendent's decision to evaluate the effectiveness of that office, but if in fact it does meet as a key ingredient as part of the recipe for success, the students asked a question: why then was it considered as a potential restructuring or cut when other things are not? And that's a question that I think somehow at some point, as part of this ongoing work of equity, is the responsibility for us to answer. In this case, I'm putting you on the spot because it's something that popped into my mind, but rest assured, it's a question that we're asking ourselves with the lines of business that we have on the county side all of the time. If something is integral and important, then why is it, as opposed to other things, always, or not always, but sometimes segmented or put out there for reduction or elimination when other things are not? And really, you're welcome to respond, or just channeling the students who spoke to me this afternoon. Ms. Talento?
That's exactly what a chief diversity officer would do, is provide that lens across the board. And when we're looking at cuts and other policy decisions, they would be able to reflect what sometimes people unintentionally do not see. And as you notice, class sizes are in Tier 1. That is a cut that affects more equitably across the board our system versus some of the minor cuts, minor in cost cuts that we would have to add up to put together to not increase class sizes. So I think what we are doing in the direction we're moving is to exactly address the kind of concerns that our students are bringing to us.
I don't want to get into a large conversation about equity, but I think that the important thing that I took away from what the students talked about can't necessarily be solved by a person, has to be solved by a policy, a plan, and a culture, and that's what they were challenging us to do.
Agreed. And one of the things that was written specifically in this report is a chief diversity officer would be crucial in forging a shared sense of responsibility among students, staff, and community partners, and leading APS in meeting its larger diversity goals. And so when you have a person at the executive leadership level that can work with his or her counterparts to ensure that everything that we are doing is having an impact that does not have a greater impact on certain cohorts of students than others, that is how we're going to meet the goal and start to eliminate some of the gaps that we have, not just with groups that are historically underrepresented, groups that we don't even think about in our diversity work, because diversity isn't just about particular groups, it is about the whole system and making our system into one culture, one community, one understanding, and one future for success of student as an individual and not as a person that has tags on them.
We all agree, and as we do this work together, I think it will be important to share at least what we're attempting to do on the county side is to recognize that part of the way that we're trying to ensure that this just doesn't become something that is person dependent for its success and longevity is how to integrate it throughout the organization through a broad section of personnel. So we're actually taking an approach where we're not going to task a singular person with making it happen, but tasking people who are extant in the organization with developing the competencies so that we can have a plan that we can then bring in the expertise as needed to having a level of accountability for delivering. So I look forward to engaging with you all on that work. Dr. Cannonen.
I want to respond to that question from a totally different lens, which is simply the fact that we had a very difficult budget this year. And you're pointing to one of, I don't even know, 100, 200 cuts, not recommended cuts, but cuts that were provided as possibilities to us in tiers 2 and 3 if we weren't able to close our gap through funds. And I think that particular potential reduction was in tier 3, which meant if we don't get the county manager's proposal for a tax increase. So I think we need to be fair about what that list is and what it represents, and by identifying one piece of those, again, couple of hundred, I'm sure, items, nobody was being targeted, or there's not a lump of certain set of things that are happening to a certain set. It's a wide variety of ideas, and then the whole point of the process is for us to hear from the community, learn about some of the ideas, and as you noticed, that wasn't on the list of reductions that we did end up taking. You know, we have to entertain ideas to balance our budget, and we're coming to you with a gap. So, you know, we really have to, we needed those ideas.
And in a tough budget year, a school system is in a unique position, unique disadvantage, because, as I'm sure you're aware, 80% of our budget is personnel. That's not true for, you know, county governments or other entities.
Pretty close.
And so, you know, these things, as Barbara points out, necessarily have to be on a suggested list of, I don't know how many we had, over 100 potential cuts. Again, something we decided not to take.
Indeed. All right, so do we have any questions coming from members of the board in the audience? I know Ms. Crystal has another line of conversation, and I'll invite her to introduce that now.
Great. Thank you so much, Chairman Dorsey. Appreciate that conversation very much on the equity piece, just to note as we wrap that up. And Ms. O'Grady, I appreciated your comments as well, as we've considered the idea of personnel investments in equity on the county side. We, too, have sought to gather a lot of information about what the necessary preconditions are. Talking, for example, as I have recently with Fairfax's chief equity officer, who took on that role after a pretty lengthy countywide process there in our neighboring jurisdiction about what the standards and vision are. So appreciate that you've been doing some of that thinking. You know, I think we've certainly felt like we were a little unripe for a new hire, and I'm glad you all are at least wrestling with that, even if you reached a different conclusion than we have. What I wanted to raise here, and I know that we're not spending a lot of time today on the quote county side of the ledger, but of course, you know, as we seek to minimize the impacts of significant tax rate increases on our community, you know, our options on the county side are not simply tax rate increases, but also looking to reduce county expenditures to be able to create more revenue and resources for public schools, which was our tack that we took last year. So in that spirit, one of the things that the manager put forward for our consideration, and that we've been having a pretty extensive conversation with our community about, is arts and investments in cultural affairs. And one of the areas as we sort of ascertain how to move forward in a way that won't gut or deeply cut programs that are well-loved and deeply valued by not only our community members, but APS as well, particularly in art and technical theater programming. One of the areas for potential efficiency that we're entertaining over time to try to hold harmless some of those more valued elements is a staffing function around scheduling. This is a bit of a perennial issue and one that we've talked about often. You know, currently scheduling of school theaters, which our community performing arts groups have access to after schools' needs in those theaters are met. And those community groups, of course, include a great many that serve students or include students directly. That is a process that, as we've talked about extensively, is labor-intensive, it's inefficient, it's relationship-based, it relies on permissions from individual school principals. It doesn't provide the assurances that these theater groups, including, again, many that do serve our young people, need to plan for their work. We've had a really terrific individual who has helped kind of work around the inefficiencies in this process through his relationship and brokering. But as he looks towards retirement and we look for the most efficient way to invest our resources, we really need the help and probably some commitment of leadership from the public schools in creating a plan and being our partner to create a new scheduling process by the end of calendar year 2019. I'll conclude there with sort of my setting up that comment, but I know I'm not in the room now. I'm hoping to use this sort of high-stakes budget conversation to really emphasize that this is a non-monetary ask here, but one that will allow us, we think, to be able to most efficiently allocate resources between county and schools, is to really get some buy-in from the central office facilities team to help us and our cultural affairs come up with a plan so that we don't need to be overcoming the kind of interpersonal inefficiencies by having a staff person dedicated to this. So I'm hoping we can use today's conversation as an opportunity, maybe see if we could get a little commitment and partnership from our school board members, whom I know value the arts in our community as well as an APS very much as well.
Thank you, Ms. Crystal. And I don't know if anyone on the school board has a response, maybe even Dr. Murphy at this time. I certainly, this is probably a dynamic conversation that we need to have in another venue, but any responses now are welcome.
Actually, at the beginning of the budget process, the county manager and I did speak about this, so this has been an ongoing conversation, and I think it's something that we can definitely address, and I think there is a solution in there. So it has some history to it, but I think we can get it resolved.
Okay, so keep us all posted on your progress, and that would be much appreciated to see you and the county manager continue in earnest.
The collaboration part of my briefing, I don't want to give that short shrift. We have extensive collaboration with Arlington County that we're happy to do and continue and expand. So as I'm sure you all know, every one of our schools are joint use facilities. We are happy to be hosting things like arts venues and, of course, the swimming pools and the soccer fields and the basketball gyms. And this is yet another area where we can and we're happy to collaborate. So let's just move that ball forward.
It's terrific. Mr. Gutschall.
And I don't know if Ms. Crystal had something else she was trying to chime in.
Go ahead.
But okay. I just want to make sure that it's, and we've talked about this is a perennial conversation. And because we've also talked about the same notion of collaboration and scheduling with respect to field use. You just referenced that, Mr. Goldstein. So I just wanted, and I think there had been some conversation about honing in on that topic specifically. And I had in my notes a spring 19 time frame. So I don't know if there's any, where's the conversation go from here? So it's great to talk about collaboration and we want to do it and we all want to do it. Where does it actually go in terms of, where does that conversation actually happen? Staff to staff to some extent.
Are you referring to fields or
Yes, sir.
Okay, so on that, and I think the superintendent and I, we've been briefing the chair, vice chair conversation every month. Conversations are ongoing. We haven't reached a resolution, so we're in vigorous discussions. They've been, what are the diplomatic communiques say? They've been frank.
Yeah,
and,
that's right, yeah. Frank and open.
Frank and open,
yeah.
but, I think it's a matter of staff time also. And I don't know if, is there anything else to add on that? No, nothing else to add. I have, Jane Rudolph is here, and she's been participating directly in those conversations with her school counterparts. They're ongoing.
Is it fair to say, though, that when those conversations either reach reach the point where there's board action needed to break through some log jams, perhaps, or you reach fruition, that you'll be reporting back to the board?
Yes, and I would note that to the extent specific questions come up, for example, with the opening of the Heights, is that it? Okay. That the question about field usage perhaps at Longbridge or other fields, we work through those issues on a one-off basis, and we make progress on that. The conversations you're talking about are to redo a lot of memorandum of understandings and sort of redoing the total policy look, and essentially trying to divvy up a resource that isn't growing, very much with demand that's growing. So yeah, if we get to a logjam where we can't magically make things work, we'll come back.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the Heights, because to Ms. Crystal's point about the cultural affairs side of it, the Heights actually has both. It's going to have a field that's going to, I'm sure, be sought after, and it's also going to have perhaps some performance space, right, that will also be sought after. So look forward to progress there. Thank you.
Indeed. So and now I think we move to the time where Chair Goldstein, we welcome any closing comments from you or your colleagues. if any, have them?
Thank you. I'm going to turn to my colleagues first and ask for their concluding comments, and then I'll wrap up. And I guess we need to keep this brief as we're coming up on the 6 o'clock hour. So ask my colleagues
Got the room all night, so.
Okay. All night is something that we're very familiar with our meetings. Can we start with Nancy?
Okay, thank you very much. I just first want to say thank you to Mr. Schwartz for listening and recognizing that we really do need more funds, especially as we open the new schools, and recognizing that at the outset of this, it was very much appreciated and took a lot of pressure off so we could focus really on the rest of the operations and what we need to do to meet the 1,000 students that are coming over our transom again next year and forward. And thank you to the county board for advertising a tax rate ceiling that would allow us to at least have this conversation. Last year we couldn't even have it, and it was very frustrating. So thank you for doing that. I've said this a couple of times, and it's going to be my theme, but as a school system, our shoes are too tight. Our budget is tight. Our buildings are tight, and the conversation we just had now about collaboration between the arts and the sports people is exactly an example of fitting things into the same size shoe. And it is going to cause contention about resources. And I think our staffs work very hard to work that out, and sometimes it helps for us to be involved, and sometimes we just have to deal with the reality of the situation is that we have more people using the same amount of resources, and we simply can't grow those as fast as we need to. So I remember this conversation about the arts back to when I was chair, and I got into the detail of it and realized that we were just arguing over constrained resources. And we're going to have to work on that, and we have to encourage our staffs to work that out with our support. And I know that they will, because I watched that the last time it happened. But our shoes are too tight. We're fitting more and more kids into the existing buildings, and we are not adding buildings fast enough to meet that growth, but we'll do it, and we'll be fine. As a business person, I have to tell you that, as I said last year, I'd say this year, you can't cut your way to growth. We're going to have to invest in growth, and we're going to have to do it smartly. So I love the fact that we're doing some studies so we can try to figure out how to make the most efficient use every time we come here and ask you for more resources. A lot of the money we asked for in terms of ads, which led us to only $500,000 additional cuts, have to do with investing in studies so that we can figure out a way to reduce those asks in the future. But we will be asking for more money in the future because of the growth and the development in this community. And we really need to be in that partnership with you. And in all the ways, you know, we're really unique in Arlington in the way we share between the county and the schools, the resources and the buildings of the schools. That is really, really unique. And it adds to the cost of the buildings, but happily, because we're well using the resources. I just wanted to comment also as a business person, I've been in 2 businesses that brought in diversity officers, as well as had diversity initiatives. Those frameworks work when you have somebody leading that. And please remember, and I think Ms. Garvey, you can speak to this, when I moved here to Arlington, we were doing courageous conversations. There's a long history of focusing on this issue in APS, and that is what our consultant, Julian Williams, told us. You have the bedrock to build from, and this is the moment that you can bring all these desperate efforts together and really focus a plan in Arlington, because all those pieces are there. You need your board commitment with our policy and the officer. So we have a lot. When you talk about the empowering in your various divisions, that actually already happens in APS. It's just not as coordinated as it needs to be to have the effect it needs. And then, you know, lastly, with the money, I join my colleagues in asking you to help us close the gap. I think given that we started at 42 million and we're down 6.8, some of that being an investment, I think we did pretty well given the number of students we're absorbing every single year. So I really want to thank you for that. And, you know, had it been up to me, we would have asked you, I think, for the full amount that the superintendent put forward, because I think he did an excellent job in doing his budget and following the direction we gave him, which was to come in with efficiencies already. So when you ask why weren't there more, it's because we asked him to find those in advance. And he really worked closely with principals to make sure he put forward cuts that we really felt as a system at the working level, they felt they could take. I don't want to take any of them. So here we are, we've compromised, we've done our work, we've all dog-eared these pages. And just thank you very much. And I think it's a pretty, actually relatively small gap, and I really do hope that you can help us with it. And just thank you so much for listening and doing what you've done already to help us.
I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here today and to share our budget with you. I will echo some of Ms. Van Doren's remarks. We have really worked hard to find compromises. I as well am not thrilled about the cuts that we are taking. I do think that the cuts in tiers 2 and 3, not only do they have direct impact to our instruction, but many of them are causing us to enter into operational risk. I wholeheartedly believe that. I see how hard our staff works at central office, our support staff, our teachers, our principals, and I think that we are running an efficient system. I also respectfully disagree with you, Chair Dorsey, on the inflation table that was presented. Inflation does affect the school system. We don't get a discount on gas. We don't get a discount on utilities. We don't get a discount on food, and perhaps I misunderstood the point you were trying to make, but I believe that the investment we make in our students is worthy. And I believe we should be investing more in our students and more in our education. We are in the top 100 counties of the country, I believe number 86. That doesn't come because we have not invested. It does not come because we are making cuts. People are moving to Arlington to go to our schools because we invest in education. Arlington County has the highest percentage of educated adults with college degrees, I believe in the country, but I would have to check my stats. I know that we are in this I think it was 60s or 70s last time I checked, and on the country as a whole, only has about 40% of Americans who have a four-year college degree. Our community believes in education. It is one of the pieces of our county that we revolve around. And when you invest in children, you're investing in our future. And I believe that I'm grateful that you have funded the schools, and I am grateful that you're considering closing our gap. And I would even ask for more to help us give our teachers not only a COLA or a step, but a COLA and a step, and be able to provide salary increases for every single person who works for our system. I would love to postpone class size increases, even if it were only at the high school level. Any additional funding you could provide for that. However, I recognize that we are in tight budget times, and we're here coming as a board to ask you to fund our gap. If you have additional closeout money, we would use it wisely. We would use it to invest in our teachers and in our students. And I think we're doing a good job in making a wonderful school system that is efficient and using our tax dollars very, very well. I believe that a system is not only about education and the people providing that education, but about the support system and the infrastructure that supports that. That is what makes us whole, and that is what is making us great today, because we have done that well. So thank you for the opportunity today to speak with you. Thank you for caring about the schools, for all the support that you have provided us. I'm very excited about our future collaborations on transportation, on equity, on fields and facilities. I think that we are moving in a wonderful direction as a school board and a county board, and I am looking forward to our future work and excited about the opportunities that will be brought to us by you being able to fund our gap and any additional money you may have found in your budget after you have done what you can on your side.
So first, obviously, to echo everyone else, thank you very much. It's great to see you. Thank you for being champions for the schools, as I know you all are. On the fly, I can't change the 2 bullet points I want to cover. And I know, as Chair Dorsey pointed out, that you know that we will have discussions about our budget and such. So let me just make these points and understand that any conflicts with what other people have already said will get worked out. But I think it's an important point for you to make, which is the difference between ongoing and one-time funds. I appreciate what you all are saying about you expect, you know, the future to be brighter and that we can sort of bridge ourselves across. But I want to remind you that we have a strategic approach to how we use our reserves and one-time funds. And as I think you know, we get our one-time from you at this time of year. We have the bond sale that provides some reserves and our own closeout. of course, and we'll see that our third quarter soon in December. But at the moment, as our chair showed you, we're running low. Every year when we do our budget, we're able to provide that full compensation increase, and we're able to address our increase in debt services by using reserves to help us kind of spread those increases over the years. So that approach, and Abby Raphael was really the instigator of the idea of the compensation reserve. That has been something we've used every year I've been on the board, and we need, $6 million in it, at least, every year. So I just want to mention to you, as you're thinking about the tax rate, that ongoing funds are needed to support our gap, because we really need to pack some money into our reserves to support our budget next year. And again, to the extent that we might be saying anything different, we will work that out. But there is an important difference, I believe, in terms of the one-time and ongoing to support this year's budget. And then the other piece of that is to bear in mind, we had a really, really tough CIP last year because we couldn't afford what we needed to do on the school side, relative to our enrollment growth. Our current CIP, now that we're opening several schools, really only has high school seats in it, the one that we adopted. And we already know we're behind in elementary, and we're already going to be behind in middle school the year after we open Dorothy Ham. So we need an aggressive CIP when we go into next winter's process, and larger budgets actually give us more debt capacity. So I hope you'll bear that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I first want to start off by saying thank you to each and every one of you and the county manager for actually understanding that we're facing tough economic times in the schools as we continue to grow and try to provide the education that our community expects us to provide for our students. We're facing some tough times. And so I appreciate the county manager adding a cent into his proposed budget, and for you all potentially opening the window to be able to give us more funding as we need it. The budget that we brought you, I believe, while it has a gap, will allow us to continue to do what our communities asked us to do. They've helped set our strategic plan goals, our mission, vision, and core values. And I think we brought you a budget that allows us to continue to do that. It's going to allow us to fully fund the psychologists and social workers that we had on par that we had hoped to fund last year. It's going to allow us to continue to move forward to ensure that all of our students are performing at the rate that they can, no matter what they speak at home, how much money their parents make, and other aspects of their home life that they may bring to school every day. Some of the things that we've been able to avoid kids having to leave school all at the same time, whether they need to stay after school for tutoring, or if they want to be involved in a particular activity because they only have one bus to take, and then going home when they could be continuing their educational learning. We also have been able to avoid asking PTAs to raise money to cover field trips that we have been sending our kids on to ensure that they are exposed to our pool so they can learn how to swim. I mean, there's a lot of things that we're doing here and keeping in place, even though we were originally looking at potential cuts if we couldn't find the monies to cover our budget. Now, I sure hope that you guys can find a way to fully fund our budget so we can continue to meet the mission, vision, and core values that we hope to provide our students in our very successful school system. And even if you do, there are still some things on the table. Ms. Talento has addressed them. I was saddened to find and look at some of the charts that were presented to us regarding the compensation for our staff, and that we are falling behind. And we do know that in a time of teacher shortage, that could potentially have an impact on the people that we're able to bring into our community to educate our students. And so this is something that we're going to have to be looking at. If we can't look at it this year, we'll have to look at it in the future, because we want to ensure that we can bring the people in who want to teach our students and can do so in the best possible way so that all of our students can continue to succeed and thrive. We have been able in the past to keep our student-teacher ratio low. This year, it is built into our budget that we are going to have to raise our class sizes. I think it's being done and proposed to be done as minimally as possible by increasing class size for 4th and 5th graders by 1 student, by increasing our middle school students ratio by 3/4 and our high school students by half. But that is something that we don't want to do. We'll do it if we have to. But just trying to show you that as we continue to grow, we're looking at ways to be efficient, and you know, we'll have to continue to look at those things, but we can use your help. And so we hope that you will keep that in mind as you make your budget considerations. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Colleagues, anyone want to make any comments? Ms. Crystal? Oh, I'm sorry, Reed. Chair Goldstein, I apologize.
I'd asked everyone to make concise concluding comments, and I will be concise here. So first I'll associate myself with all of the thank yous that everybody else has expressed to you all for your historic, strong support for our budgets and our school system, for your thoughtful questions today. Thank you to our staff and our board members for the hard work that they put in over months and months and months of pulling this budget together, and also to the community for an educated and a passionate advocacy from which we learned quite a bit as we deliberated on the budget. We are growing. APS is one of the main drivers for businesses and for people wanting to move to Arlington, and APS is growing as a result. And they're moving their families here into single-family homes, condos, townhouses, apartments, and they're staying. And for years, taxes have been able to support our growth, but the relentless enrollment growth has finally caught up with us. And we have to cut services and some operations, and we now have to get in front of our capacity crunch, and we have to continue to responsibly build and plan for the future. So I think you've heard all the rest of those details related to that. I just want to again say thank you all. It's a pleasure for us to be here and to work collaboratively with you, and I think folks on your side might have some other remarks.
I think now we will. Ms. Garvey.
I'm just going to be really short because, I mean, we're all just thank you all around. It's not easy being on the school board. I know that more than most. It's hard work. We've got a really good school system, and you're working to keep it that way and keep it efficient, and I really appreciate our collaboration. We've been working together really well. This is the best I've ever seen school board and county board working together. So thank you very much, and it's going to be an exciting year coming up. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Garvey. Ms. Crystal, do you have anything that you'd like to say? And I'll follow with some brief closing remarks.
Absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity and thanks for the conversation. I think it's been really instructive for us to see where your budget has nearly landed after the evolution over recent months. And just in closing, wanted to acknowledge not only are we aware, but I think for my part at least, I really appreciate the decision that Ms. O'Grady referenced, which was to evaluate class size increases in a way that is consistent with what the body of research tells us about where the smallest class sizes matter the most, keeping the low class sizes intact there, and following the opportunities where we can still achieve terrific and, in fact, excellent educational outcomes for our students, but do so in a more efficient way in those later grades. I know that there are truly many smaller but painful cuts that the school board could have considered that would have still added up to less than the savings realized by that significant policy decision. And I, from my own professional background, but also time spent in our public schools, believe that it's the right one. I want to commend the school board for taking that on this year. And on that note, I'll conclude. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Crystal. And I'll just say, Thank you to our colleagues on the school board. It's clear by the way that you engaged in this discussion, your closing comments, and just the engagement that we have with you all throughout the year, that we are blessed in Arlington to have a group of people who are trustees of our schools who are talented, smart, committed, and passionate. And as someone who has a very personal interest in all of that, I thank you sincerely. But I think it just bears our repeating to our community at large when we get to have these conversations once a year. And I'm also mindful as we discuss these issues, weighty as they are, particularly for us, and how adjustments and changes and scarcity are difficult for us, we do have to take a step back and realize how very, very fortunate we are as a community, where we are able to grow our investments in schools and students consistently, that we do so in a way that ensures that the future generations of young people grow at a rate substantially higher than the overall rate of government, because we view this as a fundamental community priority and we figure out a way to get it done. Yet despite that, economic circumstances put us in the position, as Ms. Van Doren mentioned, I love the metaphor, where things are just too tight. We feel that pain. And when things are too tight, it is uncomfortable. But you know, I also see that as a blessing for our wider community, because when things are too tight, it forces us to be very efficient. It forces us to not be wasteful. It forces us to do the hard work to make sure things happen. Sorry, Dr. Murphy? Oh, okay. And you know, that's an overall benefit to our community because it challenges us to do our best work to make sure every tax dollar is used efficiently. But then when we get to this year, we realize that those resources are not limitless. And unfortunately, it puts us in a position, and one of the things that I hate about this job is that we have to engage you all in scrutinizing your budget. But it's a reality because our resources do have a limit, and we have to figure out what's the right mix that we're going to then present to the wider community as to what are the proportional investments we are going to make, that we can afford to make in public education, as well as every other thing that we have to do. But I am comforted that the spirit of collaboration, not just the spirit, the actual collaboration that we engage with all the time will make this work. At the end of the day, we're going to do what we need to do in order to make sure we deliver an excellent school system for our children. And I hear that one of the pain points for you all are class sizes. I hear that, I understand it. It's one of the key recipes for your success. Call me a naive optimist, but maybe this is an opportunity to figure out if there are innovations in how to better marry the planning factors that you design with utilization in the classroom so that these cuts maybe don't have to get realized in a way that actually impact students in a way that you fear. So I don't know if that's possible. That's just me as a layperson. But I always know that when forced to make tough choices, we end up coming up with something that not only meets the challenge, but maybe is actually even better. So we look forward to supporting you in that work however we can, and we'll get to finishing a budget later this month. All right, thank you all. With that, we are adjourned.